Test, test. I'm on. I was going to say good morning, everybody, but it's not actually morning. Every time I've been practicing, I say good morning. It is morning somewhere, yep. How's everybody doing after a lot of pass and a lot of sessions? You guys are mostly awake. So I want to walk around the room a little bit. Well, we'll turn our mouse on first. I left my presenter in New Hampshire, my mouse, so we'll use this. So silence your cell phones and all that. I should probably do that too, practice what I preach. I don't even know where it is. I'll find it later. No, yeah, see if it's silenced or not. There's evaluations. You've probably seen this slide a lot. Don't forget to do your evaluations. That way their pass knows who to send back and who not to send back. Before we start, though, I want to walk around, and then you guys can all watch me trip up the stairs of the stage. And I'm going to do a show of hands kind of thing. I know we all love the show of hands things. If you make eye contact with me and you seem excited about your hand raising, I might come over to you and get closer and ask you some questions about your failures. But if you just sort of raise your hand and look away, I'll know you want me to not talk to you. That's what I do when I'm someplace. I raise my hand, my ears turn red, my cheeks turn red, and I look down because I don't want anybody to have to see me. But just to sort of, I want this to be an interactive session. So if we're going to be interactive, I want us all to be comfortable being interactive with each other and know that we all make mistakes. So who here, raise your hand if you've done this, and keep your hand up when I get through these. Kevin just knows because he raised his hand in the back there. But it might be a little while, so if you have to switch hands, that's fine. But just so we can see, let's just think of a few things. Who here has, something simple first. Who has turned off a SQL Server agent job when doing some maintenance, like a log backup job or like a replication log reader agent, and then you've gone home and you've said, oops. Yeah, okay. Oh, wow, I feel so much better already. You guys just made me at ease. Keep your hands up. You don't have to, I don't want to be like some military guy because it's going to be a while, so it's okay if you don't want to. That's good. Who here has done an update in production and you want to update a few rows and you're showing off to a new developer about how cool of a DBA you are, and you're explaining, well, this is what we do when we do this, and you're doing a joined update, which is really exciting to show to a developer who's not a SQL person. And then you click F5, and the developer says, where? Has anybody done that? Forgot the where? Yeah. Did you have a begin tran when you forgot the where? You were looking at me, so I'm going to pick on you. I told you I would. Five first times, yeah. So if you were doing an update statement today, would you put a begin tran on it or 50-50? So you're honest too. I don't have any prizes for honesty, but okay. So what about doing a restore, and you restore over the wrong database? Oh yeah. Don't hire that guy in the back. Yep. I won't get too close to this and make our sound man's ears blow up for the speaker. I'll come over here though. What about, we'll get a little more serious with HADR now. What about you've built a failover cluster, and you're like, this is cool, and this works, but I want to have an availability group for read-only routing, and you didn't read the instructions, and you made the read-only AG an automatic failover in synchronous mode on top of a failover cluster. Has anybody done that? How did it go for you? Did you have a failover? No, what happened?
Well, we had essentially called it split brain.
Yes, you had a split brain, yeah. That's one of the things we'll talk about today. Split brain is not good. No. You would think splitting is better because now we have two brains, and two brains is supposed to be better. Yeah, no, it's not. I didn't do that one, but one of my customers did. Every other mistake I've said so far, I've done. So seeing your hands go up just makes me feel like a better DBA. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's good to know that you all make the same mistakes. Some of you haven't raised your hand, so either you're lying, you're shy, or you're perfect. And either way, I'll hire you. So what about this? This is one I've actually done. It was about 15 years ago. We had a SQL Server 2000, maybe 2005, I don't remember now, failover cluster instance on a Windows Server 2003 failover cluster. And this was back in the day, maybe it was even 20 years ago. This was back in the day when the SAN admins, the DBAs fought all the time before all the SAN admins were replaced by pure storage and everything else, and SANs that just tuned themselves. But he called us disk sponges all the time. And frankly, we deserve that title because as DBAs, we like lots of storage. And back then, when you're configuring your arrays, if anybody remembers that, You want lots of small disks, mostly being unused in your own RAID group for SQL Server, because that's how you got your performance. So he was yelling at us all the time, and his name was Mike as well. And I got really excited, and I said, I emptied this drive for him on the cluster, and I said, cool. We got everything evacuated to this one. This big LUN I was about to give back to his SAN and go, all excited, Mike, here's your drive. But there was no databases on it. Why are you doing that? It was an empty drive. So I went into Failover Cluster Manager as a guy who just kind of discovered it in the job interview process when I was reading the book before the job interview that week. Or not that week, but it was like 6 months earlier that I had the job interview. And I removed the drive from the cluster. And I was like, yes! And then I was like, no! Because all of a sudden, the cluster failed over. I was like, no, that's not supposed to happen. The drive is empty. And I even did this. I looked at it, and I do this. I closed my eyes, and I looked at it again. I literally did that. And there's two reasons. Number one, I've taken firearm safety classes, and if I want to make sure a firearm's really empty, I check it, I look away, I check it, I look away, I check it. I'll even stick my finger from the breach in and make sure, not from the working end, but from this end and say, yep, it's really empty. It's just a paranoia thing. Also, I used to work as a front desk guy at a hotel that I was in the kitchen for. And I was in the kitchen there. It was a small country inn. And I was there for like 7 years. I was going to be a lifer until IT stole me from being a lifer at this hotel. And small country inn in Maine. And at the overnight shift, when I had to fill in, I had the keys for everything, including the walk-in refrigerator. And I wouldn't just steal food, because that's bad, but they didn't have anybody to serve. And you got a free meal on your shift, but overnight there's nobody to give you the free meal. So I would go in the walk-in refrigerator and just see what was in like the special aisle. I wouldn't take the good stuff, but whatever that was, I took. Well, one night I locked the walk-in when I was done, but I didn't look first to make sure the keys were in my hand. So whenever I do something I want to be careful for now, I look away and look. So I looked away and I looked, and SQL wasn't using the drive. So as I saw it failing, I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? I don't know anything about this. It failed back. I was like, oh, cool, it's coming back. It failed back, it failed. I did that 2 or 3 times, whatever the default was then, and it just died. It went, it was dead. And my heart was like sunk, and the CIO is coming by because this was an online system. Anybody know what I forgot to do? What was that? Yeah, somebody said dependency. I didn't see who it was. Yeah, Kevin said. I didn't tell the cluster that shouldn't be a dependency on SQL. So has anybody done that before? All right, that's a couple of us. So that was the moral of that story. Never give back space. Amen. Yep. That's right. That's right. So I want to talk about a few customers. One was a split brain scenario, and they also discovered that split brain was bad. So basically, it says you had one job. This is a company that made tax preparation software. And there's a couple days that are really important for them. It's used by CPAs. April 15th is one of those kind of important days because who in here is like me and does their taxes? I file for an extension, so I always do my tax on October 15th, which is the extension due date. But a lot of people apparently just file at the last minute, so they're all busy on April 15th. Or in this case, it was an April 18th year because of the holiday. So this company used to be a customer of mine, but the sysadmin was this very proud sysadmin who didn't like advice from outside consultants, and we stopped working together. They wanted to do HA and DR. They had a failover cluster instance, cool, but they wanted to do read-only reporting. Cool. He asked me about it. I said, yeah, you should build an availability group. There's a bunch of things you have to do. He said, I can figure it out. I just want to know if that's what I should do. I said, yes, that's what you should do, but there's a lot of caveats. He said, all right, yep, that's fine, thank you. Never called me again. 6 months later, he called me again. And actually, it wasn't him. It was the owner of the company. On April 18th, he had to fail over. And the reason he had to fail over is, long story, a little bit shorter. He had they had resource semaphore waits. All right, no, actually, it wasn't. It was query memory grant problems. So they had query memory grant problems, and they would restart SQL Server, and everything would get better. Well, they never had to do that except for on their busiest days. And it turns out it was actually because of a bug in SQL Server 2012 SP whatever, and it was fixed. So they had it was a memory leak that was exacerbated by tempdb queries, and they had never really done patching. But they would always restart, fail over, 15 seconds of downtime, no big deal. Well, It is a big deal, as you found out, when you're in a failover cluster and an AG, and you were in automatic failover. Because what happened is you initiated that failover. The AG said, oh no, something's happening. So the secondary, which was set to automatically failover, tried taking over. As that's taking over, the cluster failover's done, and you have a split brain. And that was a bad situation. He made it a lot worse, and we actually ended up having a customer for a long time because of that. But he actually deleted databases because he said, I don't know what's going on. It's split brain. Started dropping databases. Then he had to do restores. He said, well, I have backups. I'll do restores. Problem is he was taking 2 different log backups from 2 different processes, so he didn't understand that he had a mixed up log sequence. And he just said, oh no, what do I do? He panicked, and he restored to the last full and the last differential, which means he lost like 4 or 6 hours of data, and they were down for about 6 hours. And all that to save a little bit of consulting dollars, unfortunately. We have a few clients that have enterprise budget with standard edition needs. and what nobody really has an enterprise edition budget. But what I mean by that is you're using enterprise edition and you're paying for it, therefore you must have an enterprise edition budget whether you expect it to or not. But they're dealing with like 64 gigs of RAM, and they just need simple 2-node HA, 2-node DR. But they didn't understand what's available to them. So they went ahead and said, well, the internet says I must have enterprise edition for this. Well, the internet sometimes gets things wrong. We had another client that had too many databases in an availability group. They called us up with weird performance problems. We said, we'll jump in and look at it. And the problem was they had 1,250 databases in an availability group. And I saw your reaction, and that's my reaction when I saw it. And the first thing we did was they were having thread pool waits, go figure. So thread pool, SQL Server has worker threads. The worker threads are necessary to keep things in sync. Not as bad as mirroring was, but availability groups, when you get to 1,250 databases, you shouldn't have got that far. I get nervous at about 150-ish databases. So 1,250 is like 10 times the nervousness. And we increased the max worker threads, not the end-all, be-all solution, but that was a temporary thing. And then we analyzed their needs, and long story short, we brought them over to standard edition with failover clustering using Sios Datakeeper. I'm not a Sios sales guy, this is a tool I prefer, but we use Sios Datakeeper to keep their drives in sync and gave them the ability to be on Amazon, that's where they were trying to go anyway, on a failover cluster with standard edition. So these are kind of why we're here today. We have a few goals. I'll stay on the stage now and creak around the stage here. I want to challenge assumptions, right? So this is a 101 level talk. I should have said that in the beginning and kicked you all out. If you're expecting demos and for me to build a failover cluster in front of you with PowerShell, like my employee Jack did this morning in his PowerShell DBA tool script, I'm not going to do that. We're going to have a conversation, and I want to answer questions. I'm not going to architect for you up here, but I want to answer questions based on all the mistakes I've made and all the approaches we're going to talk about. So if there are no questions and interaction, we're probably going to leave early. If there are questions and interactions, we're going to leave on time. And there's no session after this, so I can just sit around and talk. I can talk forever. Ask anybody who works for me. So the other thing I want to challenge assumptions. So but if you're looking for an in-depth HADR session, it's okay to vote with your feet and take off. It's fine. I won't be offended. If you're just too tired, you can stay and hang out and check your email too. That's fine. But people sometimes say, well, you can't do that in standard edition. Or you can't. I had one customer recently say, I need to move to always on. And I said, well, what does that mean? Like, always on, by the way, is not a technology. Always on is a marketing term. There's always on availability groups, and there's always on failover cluster instances. So you can't implement always on. You can implement availability groups, but he said, I have to move there because, I said, why? Why do you have to move there? Like, if you want to, I'm not somebody who dissuades work, but why do you have to move there? He said, because failover clusters are going away. And the next release said, no, they're not. Failover clusters aren't going anywhere. You don't need, so there's lots of misinformation out there. I want to talk about that. Some people diss log shipping. Log shipping is great. Who uses log shipping for DR in here? Yeah, it's a fine technology. What was that? Oh, it's great for migrations. It's amazing for zero or near. I never say zero to customers, but near zero downtime migrations. Yep, absolutely. It's also just good for DR. It works and it's affordable. I want us all to leave realizing there are actually answers to some of these assumptions and misinformations, and I want you to leave ready to talk to your business and explore the options available to you for HADR. Who am I? I've been talking to you for 20 minutes and you haven't left yet. I even told you who I am. How rude of me. I'm Mike Walsh. I've been doing SQL for 20 years. I've been an MVP for 8-ish years, 9, I think. If you go to that link right there, straightpathsql.com. So I run a small IT consultancy. We do managed services and stuff. I have 11 full-time employees. It keeps growing. I ran out of hands, so I have to take my shoes and socks off to count the teams now. You don't want me to do that, so I won't today. But if you go straightpathsql.com/HADR, you'll actually see a pretty boring blog post right now that just has a slide share, which actually is not the most up-to-date slide share. I'll fix that later. And when we're done here, this weekend, I will take any of your questions that you ask and any of the things we talk about, any of the architectures you ask about, and I'll put drawings up there and I'll put more answers. So if you go there by Monday evening, Eastern time, you will see updated details from this. So you can take notes if you want, but all the slides are there and all the notes will be there too. Our plan of attack is to really kind of start high. I want to talk about HA and DR from 30,000 feet. Again, I told you this is a 101 level talk. I want to talk about what is HA, what is DR, what aren't they. I want to remind you that we have to talk to the business and listen to the business. I'm sorry, it is what it is. I want to talk about licensing and licensing implications. I'm sure you've all heard the really cool news this week about a lot of the changes. Like, you should be excited. I mean, maybe I'm a weird person who gets excited too easily, but I'm excited for my customers and our managed service practice, who are database managed service customers. I'm excited for them because of things like you can now have a third node in an HA situation for DR with software assurance. That just changed the game. You can have a DR node without paying a license for it. That is enterprise edition licensing. That's not cheap. That was nice of Microsoft. If you see Microsoft, you should say thank you. I want to talk about licensing, and I want to put the different approaches together, talk about the plans, talk about all the technologies, and just talk about how we can mix and match them, because there are lots of ways. There's almost as many ways to mix and match these technologies as there are ways to form query plans. So we're going to talk about a few of them, but if you have questions about, hey, in my environment, I'm trying to do this, just raise your hand and ask. I won't bite. I might come down on stage and talk to you closer, but I'll chew some gum first for your benefit. So we're going to talk about HADR from 30,000 feet. I never learned from the presidential debates. I still drink water on stage. So I want to talk about the options available to us in SQL Server. I want to talk about why HA and DR are different. So here we go. Recovery time objective is RTO. Have you all heard the term RTO, RPO? So just to be clear, recovery time objective really answers the question. It's kind of like when you're driving with the kids. It's sort of like ATO, arrival time objective. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? It's how long will it take to get back up. That's a really important metric for us to measure. RPO is recovery point objective. How much data can we afford to lose? And I'm just going to ask, pretend you're the business, and I'm the DBA, and I just want to ask you, in any scenario on Earth, in any kind of problem, no matter what it is, how much data can we lose, and how long should we be down for? Anybody have an answer? Yeah, okay, yeah. And our answer back is, cool, that's exciting, here's the budget. and what's their answer back to that? yeah, I thought so, yeah. They really, they get mad at you and they blame you for, I can't believe this is so expensive, blah, blah, blah. SLA is really the service level agreement. So you agree to an RPO and an RTO, and the SLA is the stick that they measure you by or whip you by. Some SLAs are real. Some SLAs are like the kids in the restaurants whose parents just keep telling me over and over again, you better stop or else, you better stop or else, don't make me mad. But some SLAs actually take the kid out of the restaurant and put him in the car. So that's how we do it. So HA and DR, these are important terms to understand because a lot of people use them interchangeably. They are not the same. Just for clarity, HA is high availability, DR is disaster recovery. HA is not DR. High availability, I think of as the oh no situation. Throw out a failure. What's a good HA situation? I'll pick on Lynn because he's looking at me.
Server crash.
Yeah, server crashes. Yep. What's another one? I'll pick on Brian because he's looking at me, sort of. What was it? Patching, thank you so much. Nobody ever says patching. What's your, can I ask your name? Kathy, thank you. Kathy's right, patching, patching, patching. I don't have a slide that talks about patching, and I'm embarrassed about it, but every time I've rehearsed this and practiced this, I talk about patching to myself, and I'm just too lazy to go over here and type patching someplace. But absolutely, patching. Patching is way more important now. Who in here works in a somewhat regulated industry today? And every hand should go up. If the hand didn't go up, you just don't want to raise your hand, or you just work at a candy store. I know there's there's credit cards there. So we have to patch. We have to stay on top of patching. And Microsoft and every vendor is releasing patches all the time. And our users don't differentiate between that. You can't say, well, don't worry, it's a patch. If you're a 24/7 environment, you have to be up. So absolutely patching. Great point. It's a local failure or a local planned event like a patch. Normally, the data center is okay. The region in Azure or AWS is okay. Most folks expect, now I say most folks because I bet you there's someone here who's in an industry that has to have the exact same RPO and RTO for HA and DR. Is there anybody? What, is it, you raising your hand? No, okay. So you did? No, nobody did, all right. Sometimes there is, maybe it's online gaming because there's so much money going through there. They don't care what the problem is. Basically, lots of Amazon for their shopping. They're not on SQL Server for the shopping, but they have to have the same HA and DR. Netflix has to have the same HA and DR. Most folks, though, expect kind of less than 15 minutes for RTO and RPO. Really, less than 15 minutes for an RTO with a 0 RPO. So we're going to lose no data if we have a local failure, but it's okay if it takes you 15 minutes to get us back. That's kind of up to 15. Depends on the industry. Lynn's shaking his head. Sometimes it's way lower. Yeah. Sometimes it's 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Yep. But the point is it's a local isolated failure. DR, instead of oh no, it's the oh bleep. It's something bad has happened. We've lost our data center. In my spare time, I'm a farmer. In my spare time, I'm a homeschool parent. In my spare time, I'm on the fire department in my town. I don't have much spare time. And we always say after we're done with the fire training, I'll see you at the big one. And what we mean by that is we'll see you at the huge fire that calls mutual aid from 16 counties and 4 states away. And there's like one of those every 2 years. So the big one just happened to you. Your data center is gone. Your SAN is gone. Has anybody heard the phrase SANs can't fail? Yeah, they do. I've seen it happen. You have to switch regions. Something really bad happened. Most folks in most industries allow for and understand a slower RPO, a slower RTO. They're okay, potentially, having a longer recovery time and losing a little bit less data. They say, listen, if our data center blows up, people are more understanding. But it depends on your industry. So also with the 30,000-foot view, we're going to talk about these technologies. And if there are questions, just throw them out to me as we're talking about these terms. So any questions so far on the things we talked about? Okay. So these are SQL Server technologies, and we're going to kind of race through them. If you have a what-if question or a tell me more about this technology question, we can zoom in on it. We have time to zoom in. This failover cluster instances. You notice I didn't say always on failover cluster instance. I should have. It's really always on failover cluster instance. That's the always on is the marketing term. FCI or AG are the actual technology. Failover cluster instances protect your entire instance. That's why they call them failover cluster instances. It's a clever name. So the entire instance is protected by the cluster service. That's why on a failover cluster instance, your SQL Server service should be set to manual startup. Don't go and fix it. Why is that manual? It should be automatic. No, you want the cluster manager to actually take care of your SQL Server startup for you. You don't want every time you restart SQL Server to come up. That can cause another kind of split brain potentially. It's protected, but it can happen. You don't need to have a SAN, as some people have told you, but you have to have shared storage. And you can replicate shared storage in many ways. You can use S2D, storage spaces direct. You can use storage replica in Windows. I mentioned Silos Data Keeper. Again, I'm coming sort of away from the pulpit. I'm not speaking, I'm not trying to sell a tool to you. I don't make anything. It's a tool I like. It's been out way longer than anybody else. We use it in a lot of our customers, and it works well. What it does is it's block level storage replication. So you can have an F drive on this server, an F drive on that server, and they stay in sync by this third-party tool. And now it looks like shared storage. So now you can put a failover cluster instance on virtualization without your VMware administrator slapping you all around for wanting to have RDMs. And a good VMware administrator should slap you around for wanting RDMs, raw device mapping. Another way it's good is if you want to have a failover cluster instance up in AWS or in Azure. You can do that by replicating the storage. So you don't need a SAN. So I got to be careful when I say this because I don't want people to think I'm a Luddite here. I love availability groups. I teach about them. I help implement them. I'm being laughed at for being called a Luddite, maybe. But availability groups are great. Failover cluster instances are just a little bit easier. The whole instance is protected. Now, 2019 promised to fix some things. I don't know where it is. I haven't had time to play with 2019, see where the final release bits are. But it doesn't fix all of the things, if it even fixed any of the things. You have to keep logins in sync and jobs in sync and all of that. A failover cluster instance, your entire instance is protected. You install SQL Server effectively one time, and you're done. So when accounting goes and buys Great Plains, and for some reason, and they add new databases, because they add a new account or a new chart of accounts, and that creates a new database, they don't have to call you up and say, hey, DBA team, I just added a database. Do you want to protect that? I cannot tell you how many times, you've probably seen it, Kevin, as a consultant, where you go into an environment and like 4 of the databases are protected, and the 4 newest databases are not protected because nobody thought they had to add it. They just figured, I connected it to the listener, I added the database, it should be there. No, it's not there. And a failover cluster instance, it is. So FCIs are really nice. So it's important to know that you can do them without having to go buy a SAN, because that gives you a bunch of options. Availability groups, I still really like. I like all of most of all of these things on my list here. Even replication has its moments. You know, I love all my kids. Some I love more than others. I was just being recorded. I love them all the same. Always on availability groups, though, they give you database level protection. And they protect a database or multiple databases. I separated out enterprise and standard. There's a guy named Alan Hurt, who's a fellow SQL MVP. He is amazing and smart, and he wrote the book on HADR. But he gets really weird about semantics. So Microsoft calls it basic availability groups and standard edition. He hates that. It's really just an availability group. The only difference between enterprise and standard is you can only have 2 replicas. I call them nodes here. Please don't tell Alan Hurt and treat a picture of that. I meant to call them replicas, but they're replicas. In a standard edition AG, you can only have 2 replicas, your primary and your secondary. In enterprise, you can have more than 2. I forget the number. It keeps changing. I think it's 8 now, or whatever the number is. You don't need that many, and if you think you need that many, I'd love to be your consultant because you must have a nice budget. So there might be a need for it, but there's very rare to need it. So in standard edition, you have to have, some people say, well, you can only have 1 database protected. No, that's not true. You have to have 1 database per AG. That's the limit. You can have multiple AGs, and if you follow the dots of where I'm going, that means you can have multiple listeners. I have to see how many dots I go before I fall off the stage. That'd be fun. Multiple AG listeners, and then you can have multiple failure points. You could have multiple failover approaches. Because what happens is an availability group allows you to fail a whole group of databases over together. So a lot of times, like I pick on a hospital. Anybody here work for a hospital or healthcare system? Sure. So a lot of our clients are in that space. So, you know, for most of our hospitals, most of them use Citrix, it seems like. So we have a Citrix AG, which has all the databases that manage their Citrix farm. They fail over as one group. We might have a CorePoint AG, which I don't even know what CorePoint does. It does something for hospitals. I'm a database guy. We might have an EMR for whatever EMR they have that stores all of the EMR databases and the helper databases. So they all fail over as a group. Well, with standard edition, you can't do that. Really, if you need to protect more than a few databases and you want to stay in SQL Server Standard and you want to have automatic failover and you want to have them all fail over together, I would probably steer you towards a failover cluster instance. It's just an easier approach for you to do, and it's going to give you a better failover experience. I wouldn't be offended if you didn't listen to me, but it's way more work. You could get creative and do something like build PowerShell rules to say if this database fails and fail them all over and use one listener and all that. But once you start adding human complexity to your environment, and this is for HA and DR, that's not advisable, right? That's where that customer who I explained to you on tax day, he had way too much human complexity and ignorance to his process, and it killed them. You want to keep it simple. You want this stuff to always work. So the big difference, though, is availability groups are a database level protection. So none of those server level objects are protected. Log shipping, it works. Some people like to diss log shipping because it's old and slow, but I like Kevin, so thanks, Kevin, I appreciate it. It works. It works. You don't need anything special. It's been there even before it was there as a feature. It's just taking a log backup and restoring it after you've restored fulls or diffs and restoring them in recovery mode. So it's pretty simple. Hopefully, you're already taking the log backups and shipping them someplace, so now you're just restoring them. It's a very inexpensive way to do it. And if you have a small database, you could theoretically do always on. You could do log shipping to a SQL Server Express instance if you wanted to and save money, right? You have to do some manual processes to set up your job, but there are scripts out there to do that. DBA Tools.io has scripts to do that. There's Brent Ozar's SP All Night Log, I think it is. And I put replication here just so you'd laugh at me. No, I put replication here because it actually, it originally kind of came out as an HA technology, but it's actually more important, I think, as a read-only reporting option. Remember, I'm trying to save you money up here. I feel like a sales guy. I'm trying to save you money. Please, buy my timeshare. But with replication, you can actually be in SQL Server Standard. You can have 2 nodes for HA and a failover cluster instance. You could do log shipping for DR, so you have a 3rd node. And you could have a 4th node that you replicate to, all in SQL Server Standard. And 3 of your nodes now you're not paying licenses for if you have software assurance. You're just going to pay for that read-only one, which you'd have to pay for anyway, even with software assurance, because you don't get free reads in software assurance. So what you do now is you have replication be your readable. And replication, hear me out, it's nice. It has pros and cons, for sure. You have to get it in sync. It might fall behind. It's work. Don't do merge replication. Gosh, no. But transaction replication is pretty easy to set up as long as you have primary keys in your tables, and you should have primary keys in most tables anyway. And if you don't have a primary key, just quietly add one and make it identity column, or don't tell them I said it. But if you have a replicatable database, which most of us do for reporting, you can do that. And the cool thing about replication is you can choose a subset of your data. You might have 400 tables, and all you really report on are 50 tables. Now just replicate those 50 tables. What if you wanted to do filtered replication and to do a filtered publication and just have a certain subset of your data, just the most recent data or just the oldest data? Whatever the case is, you can do that, and you're doing it on standard edition. If you have enterprise edition and you can do AGs, by all means, do the AGs and pay for that extra replication, that extra node in enterprise edition. But if you want to stay on standard, you can do that. And the other cool thing is they still haven't figured out a way to give you indexes yet on your secondaries in a read-only secondary. You can get different statistics that get created for you, and the temp DB on the other side. But if you actually were to just replicate to a new database, now you can build indexes on that secondary that don't live on the primary. So now you don't have to worry about adding too many indexes to your OLTP system. So it works. I'm going to talk about outside of SQL Server technologies in a second. Does anybody have any questions about those SQL Server technologies or one that you really think I missed? Yes. Just raise your hand so I can see. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, so distributed availability groups 2016. So that's just it's a flavor of availability group. It's kind of like an availability group of availability groups, if you will. I've spent more time with customers dissuading them from a distributed AG because they thought they needed them. What's your scenario? Yep. 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 Mm-hmm. So they're using distributed AGs to kind of do read-only, but you can still do that without a distributed AG. You just make a 3-node availability group. So a distributed AG is for a really complicated multi-site failover in my mind, where you want to be able to have sort of 2 nodes here that are in HA, and I'm drawing this out, but I'll kind of draw it out in the blog post I told you guys about, and I'll relink to that at the end. Just gonna make my notes here so I don't forget. Distributed, because if you don't write it, it doesn't happen. That's what you tell us in the ambulance. So a distributed AG is kind of good if you want to have HA here, 2 nodes here, and you want to have 2 nodes here. And if you fail over, you still have HA. But you can achieve that with a 4-node AG and not have to have the complexity of a distributed AG, is my opinion. So I've actually never got to play with a distributed AG in production, because the only one I got to play with, I said, no, you didn't need a distributed AG. Let's just go to a 3-node AG, and we did that. Because I'm a huge fan of reducing complexity. Life is complicated enough. Kevin? Yeah. Yeah, replication. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I really see it for the reporting, not so much for that, because we have AGs. If you want it for DR, use an AG or failover cluster with a storage replication technology giving you 3 nodes, or a VM technology. There was a question over here too, I think. Yes? Mirroring fits in something that's called availability groups. So database mirroring was deprecated. I forget when they deprecated it. Microsoft keeps doing this every 2-year thing, so I have a hard enough time remembering all the kids' birthdays. And we only have 4, and I can't remember my cow's birthdays at all. I have to look at the piece of paper. But mirroring was deprecated, I want to say, on the deprecated list in SQL 2005 or 2012. Anyway, it's gone. It's gone. Well, it works, but it's deprecated, so you shouldn't be building a new mirror. Yep. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the question was, what about mirroring? And the kind of rephrase was mirroring was replaced by AGs. Yes, really mirroring sort of metamorphosized into availability groups. It's basically, it's the same sort of technology, but mirroring, you have to do a few things manually, right? Mirroring, you don't get to have the automatic failover. You can with a witness, but you don't get the name switch, or you can with a witness, but you can't do the multi-node, and you can't do all of the same things the same way. It's much easier. So mirroring is deprecated, it's not supported. She was saying you see it in 2017, you might. Yeah, so, but you built it new in 2017? Yeah. I'll have to look at that. I'll have to look at that because Sure. Yeah, there's a reason it doesn't work for the management studio. It's because it's gone. Yeah. So if you use an older management studio, you might have it. Because management studio, actually, they changed so much. Huh, yeah. So that's probably there for legacy purposes. In fact, I didn't even know it because I wouldn't do it. Because it's not supported. It's not officially supported. It's not in the product anymore. It must be there in the bits still. I wrote down to look about that, and I'll explain in a sentence on that blog post on Monday what the real story is. But it's gone. It's deprecated, and you might be able to do it with command line only or an older version of Management Studio. But that's kind of a sign for you to probably not go there. Question over here. What was that? Sure. So the question is about licensing, and which one of these scenarios on the screen do you have to have 2 licenses versus 1 versus standard versus enterprise? It's really pretty simple. For failover scenarios, if you have software assurance, you get 1 HA copy. So if you bought a license properly through the proper channels, not on eBay or something, and you bought proper software assurance, you can have, historically it's always been, you can have a free failover. So you get an HA failover or a DR failover. What the change was that they announced this week, or last week, Amit in his blog post put out, which is really amazing. And again, I told you guys, and I'm stealing my own thunder, I said you should thank Microsoft. You really should thank Microsoft for this. You can actually now have a second failover for DR typically, without having to burn a license for that second DR. That is huge right there, because now you can have HADR with one license plus software assurance. And which of these technologies? Yes, all of these technologies, except for, in standard edition, on an availability group, you can only have 2 replicas. So you only get one. You only get 2, although you can use log shipping for your DR. And check with licensing. I'll make a note of that. I don't want to give licensing guides. I believe your log shipping would still count, but I don't want to lie to you, so I'll double check. It's easier to figure out the IRS tax form sometimes than read the Microsoft licensing guides. And that's like with keeping up to date with their updates. In failover clusters with standard edition, you can only have 2 nodes. So you can't have a 3-node failover cluster instance. So again, that third license doesn't help you. Does that answer the question? Yep. You can't, no, so yeah, so the question, sort of the follow-up question was, you can't use those secondaries for anything else. And absolutely, those are for DR purposes or for HA purposes. They are effectively dead to you. But one of the really big things that I'm really, really excited for is Microsoft finally clarified for us that you can still do check DBs on your secondary. You can still do backups in your secondary. You can still connect to your secondary and monitor it for resource utilization. Before, it was kind of a gray area where I would always tell people, and then I'd shake my head yes and make sure that the room wasn't bugged. I would say you can do it, but the licensing guide's unclear. So I would tell people before, send emails to as many Microsoft licensing salespeople as you can, and once one of them says yes, print that email off and put it in your drawer and do it. But now you can do it without having to feel guilty and looking behind you every time you see that car coming slowly behind you, think it's Microsoft police coming to get you. And they're not going to come all the way down to Houston to get you next year. Yes, sir. Hang on, I'm sorry, I can't hear with the fan. Let me come up closer. What was the question? A 20 gig, sorry, what? Growth rate, yep. Yep. Yeah, so if you have 20 gig growth rate, every hour you said?
No,
Once a day, which technology would you use? Yeah, I have some clients with big change that I have to look and see their log backups to see how much they're changing. But 20 gigs a day sounds like on the order of what I've seen in availability groups. It depends on when the changes happen, and when the batches happen. So an availability group is pretty good at streaming your traffic through. What you might have to do, potentially, is be an asynchronous availability group, which allows you to not make your OLTP users wait for that commit to happen. And the commit might be 5 seconds behind. So you have to choose, and again, this is not an AG class, so we don't have a slide talking about synchronous and async, but in an availability group, you can have synchronous AG or an asynchronous AG. Synchronous just means that the transactions must be on the secondary nodes for failover before they're committed, which means the users, when they clicked OK on that button for submit, that submission is not done until it's here on the primary and here on the secondary. In asynchronous mode, it means Microsoft's still going to do its darndest to try and get it there at the same time, and under most normal operating circumstances, it's going to be there at the same time anyway, but we're basically saying in async mode, I'm okay if I'd rather lose 5 seconds of recovery point objective than make my users wait. So I might try synchronous, because you can change the modes all day long. You can synchronous, async, sync, async, sync, async, and nobody's going to get mad at you. I mean, your DBA might, if you're not the DBA, like, what are you doing to my server? And the monitoring people might, because they'll see the notes. But you can change it and see what works for you. Failover cluster instances, you're doing shared storage, so that right is pretty much there. But again, when you're dealing with a tool like Storage Spaces Direct or Sios Data Keeper, if that 20 gigs all happen in 4 seconds, any storage replication technology is not going to keep up with that. So you would want to probably have that storage replication, therefore be in async mode. You can still do a failover cluster, but that means you're potentially opening yourself up for data loss. So, I would still think of an availability group, and I would still think of async as a backup. Yep. Yes, sir. Correct, and that's good. Yep. So in async mode, you can't do automatic failover, and praise Microsoft for that, because you don't want to have an automatic failover happen with your database not synced, because what that means is we're rolling forward and rolling back we're saying it's good, I'm happy. Microsoft makes you, if you want to do a failover in async mode, you have to basically use this long command that says, I know I'm going to lose a lot of data, and I'm okay with it. I'm the one signing off this. My name is Mike Walsh. Yes, do it. It's something like that. I might have had a few extra words in there. But you have to say that to fail over, because you're going to lose data potentially. So Microsoft, you don't want them to fail over automatically for you without knowing your data is good. But yeah, so if you need the automatic failover, then you have to be synchronous. But again, 20 gigs a day, it doesn't scare me. I mean, the real solution is if it does get slow for you, buy better storage. I mean, it's going to be okay. I've seen clients use more than that in big batch processing. And on some index reorgs, you might see more than 20 gigs of transaction log traffic generated anyway. So you'll probably be okay in synchronous mode. Yep. Any other questions on this? Yes, sir. Yeah, so that's it's a cloud question. What do I think of managed instance and whether it makes any of this easier? Yes, managed instance, you don't get to choose all these HA technologies, but you sort of can press a couple buttons and have HA. So managed instance and Azure SQL DB or SQL DB Elastic Pools does make implementing HA and DR easier. In fact, you have HA by default. You can't do anything about it, but you can add in DR, so it makes it a bit easier. So I'm going to go forward slides a few, or one, and we'll talk about outside of SQL Server technology. And again, there's a lot more that we're going to talk about just here. I'm just trying to give a taste of a few things to come into the next slides. So inside of virtualization, we have approaches. We have VMware and Hyper-V HA technology. That's cool. What's the big problem with that? Anybody know the big, I kind of wrote it there, but Kathy, what's the problem with VMware HA and DR for HA? So that's actually not a problem. That's good. So that's a benefit. You don't have to worry about it. Well, until it's not good. Well, here's the big problem. You don't have what I call C drive level protection. You don't have operating system level protection. You are basically protecting. You have one instance of SQL on one instance of Windows out there, and that's protected by VMware or by Hyper-V and its high availability options. If something happens to the host that you're on, so we have two servers. These two chairs are two servers. I want to make sure I don't unplug a bunch of stuff. If this server dies, things on this will move over to this server with VMware HA. And in a perfect world, when all buttons are working, you're going to come up just fine, and you might not even have any downtime. It's just like a vMotion. If anybody here has done a vMotion of a server or a live migration, you don't even notice it, unless it's a really, really busy server, and then you might notice it for a couple seconds where it gets a little sluggish. But that's great for a hardware failure. But if you want to patch a passive node, this chair is gone. There's no second chair. You have one chair. You can't patch your passive node. So a failover cluster instance or an availability group lets you patch the passive node and then do all your reboots here. Because every Windows reboot just has one restart only, patch, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, one at a time, exactly. And if you forgot a few updates or if somebody forgot to patch, you start the patch, and I can't do this, there's a pending reboot. So your users in the VMware environment are waiting for each of those restarts. That's not high availability. The other problem is when you do this patch, if you broke your operating system, which, knock on wood, doesn't happen that much, but it happens. Has anybody here seen a patch corrupt Windows? Yeah, it's happened. I mean, earlier on in our careers, it happened more than now, but it still happens. If you corrupt this operating system, all that happens is this operating system tries to come over to this server, wakes up and says, I don't work. I don't work. I'm getting a workout. Not really that big of a workout. But it doesn't come over because now your operating system is corrupted. So VMware HA is really nice for, I don't have to worry about it, and it's automatic, but you don't get to sort of protect your operating system. So that's the downfall to that. That said, you can use various DR technologies inside of virtualization. I'll just throw a few out. Zerto comes to mind. A lot of my clients are using Zerto. Lynn used Zerto. So you might do high availability inside of virtualization with failover cluster instances, with storage replica, or S2D, or Sios Data Keeper, or Starwind, one of those tools. And then you might protect those nodes with Zerto. or SRM, or Zerto plus SRM. I'm not a VMware administrator. I just trust them and make sure that they show me that it works while I have transactions running and say, oh, cool, I do believe you. Or double take, double take with SQL Server aware components, by the way, because there are a lot of these technologies, and I'll sidebar, a lot of these VM-based snapshot and VM-based recovery tools oftentimes have two modes. There's sort of the mode that everybody just gets, and there's the SQL Server aware or application aware mode. If you are not running a SQL Server aware or crash consistent application aware snapshot technology, and you can do this in Zerto. You can do Zerto the wrong way, can you, Lynn? Yep. And if you, yeah. So and if you do, we had a client that did this once. They were using double take, and they were not using the SQL Server aware double take. So they were not quiescing their I/O. They weren't freezing their I/O every time they took their snapshot. They copied it over, and I said, this is bad. This is really bad, guys. You shouldn't do this in our health check like 10 years ago. And they said, no, it's not. I said, why not? And they said, every time we do our restore testing, we fail over, and there's no problem. I said, well, how many transactions are going on in your restore testing? I said, what do you mean? I said, well, tell me how busy is your environment when you're doing your restore test? And they kind of laughed and said, what are you talking about? We don't do our restore testing with users in. We come in on the weekend. All of our systems are down. We fail over. And SQL comes up every single time. None of this corruption stuff you're talking about. Well, no kidding. There's no corruption because the databases are not doing anything. What happens if you don't have a crash-consistent SQL Server aware snapshot, you don't have your LDF and your MDF the exact same snapshot because I/O was not frozen. You come over, anytime there's a transaction running, you come over and you have a problem. I wrote a blog post, I don't know, 7 years ago, on a train coming back from this customer in Boston that I was helping. It's called Yes, Virginia SANs Can Fail. This is this customer. Their SAN did fail. They had 4 drives in an Equalogic that were all the same batch number and lot number, all fail. They implemented their DR automatically. Double Take brought over 60, 70% of databases without corruption because they have so many databases that were just doing nothing. But 40%, ironically enough, the ones that were most used didn't come over right. And we had to go and do a bunch of restores. You have to use something that's crash consistent and SQL Server aware. Zerto has an option that lets you do that. All the tools do. And I'm not pushing Zerto, it's just the one that comes to mind, the one everybody talks about these days. But Veeam has a tool that does it, Datto has a tool that does it. Microsoft used, I think they bought a tool from InMod, Scout, behind Azure Site Recovery, which uses it. So you can do these snapshot type technologies to protect your VM environment. So a lot of times I will do a SQL Server-based HA, because I want to be able to patch, like Kathy said, and then I'll use one of these VM technologies for DR. And again, I talked about using tools like Sios or Starwind, I think makes it, S2D, those kind of tools to do block level replication. You can combine them with SQL. So for some reason, when I got to this point in my slide deck, I was listening to the Kinks, so all my slide titles have Kink song titles in them. Some of them do. Don't forget to dance. This is kind of like dancing. That's why it works. All these technologies are different approaches to do things, and we can pick pieces and parts of them. So there's lots of ways to guide our technology here, but we have to let the RPO and the RTO guide us. We have to let the business guide us. So many times as a SQL Server consultant, I get calls from people who want to implement a technology. They say, I want to do this thing because this technology sounds cool. Like, all right, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? I don't know, I want to use this technology. And I try not to take their money. I try and say, well, let's talk to the business and see what the business needs. So we have to ask the right questions to the business, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have to mix and match this. We can, and we don't have to. We can just use an availability group. We can just use a failover cluster instance. There's nothing wrong with that. But we can mix and match from all these technologies to build out some dance cards. And just a few dance cards that I think work, right? So there's AG only. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do a 3-node with Enterprise Edition. You can do a 2-node Standard Edition, depending on if you need DR or not. You can have read-only routing. And I have a note here. This is a side note for a sidebar. And I'll save talking about each of these technologies until questions because they're pretty self-explanatory. But I am not a big fan of ever manually doing a DR failover. I want to make sure a human being says, yes, it's a problem. And yes, we've agreed that it's going to take way too long to recover, so we're going to initiate a failover. Because we might just have a local problem, like with a SAN, that a couple of reboots and a good swift kick fixes. or karate chop or elbow, whatever. So I don't want a failover for that because the cleanup from a failover, even with all these tools, SRM makes it pretty easy. With Zerto, you just click buttons and it's good, but it's still a big nerve-wracking event. I don't want to failover if I don't have to. So if you're in the kind of environment that can say, you know what, let's wait and see and make a point. If we get to 2 hours, that's our point of no return. That's our Alamo. 2 hours is our Alamo. Once we get to 2 hours and we don't fix it, we're moving over. And we're going to do 15-minute updates and make sure we're good. But the point is I like manual failover to DR. Anybody disagree with that? No. All right. Failover cluster instances. Again, I love failover cluster instances. They just work. They work, they protect your whole instance, and you can do them with standard edition. You can do them without a SAN. We talked about that a lot. So I said the internet says you can't span a failover cluster across the data centers. Well, the internet also said that guy will never win an election, right? So clearly sometimes the internet gets things wrong, right? I'm not making any political statements either way, but the internet was wrong about that. That guy did win an election. And you may like that or not like that. But they work, and I lied. I said I drew a picture. I meant to take that slide out. I'll have to draw a picture now and put it on my site. Don't worry, it's not my drawing. I'll use Lucid Chart because my drawings are terrible. Picture of multi-node FCI. The point is they're just easy to set up, and they're easy to manage. A lot of times, if a client shop does not have a DBA, most of us here are DBAs, but there are people out there that surprisingly don't have DBAs, which is good for my company. It keeps us in business. But if they want to implement AGs, I'll say, well, listen, that's fine, but you might need more of our time. We'll have to build some PowerShell scripts. Like if anybody here in Jack's session earlier today talking about PowerShell and DBA tools, that was pretty cool. You guys all clap for him. Nobody clapped for me today, but that's fine. No, please, that's fine. I give him a raise for that. But you can build an AG pretty easy, and then you can use PowerShell to sync your logins and jobs. So you can do it, but you have to do it. A failover cluster instance, it's just there automatically. You can do DR potentially. You can do a 3-node with a good pipe to make sure your transactions stay in sync. You could do log shipping on top of it. And again, I talked about this earlier. I'm not going to beat it to death here. But FCI plus replication, it really does work if you just need to do reporting off of it. Again, there's some caveats there. I wouldn't use the replication for DR, though. I would probably use log shipping for DR. There's many other assorted approaches. We'll get to your questions in a little bit here, hopefully, and talk about other approaches that you might have. And again, don't be afraid of log shipping, and don't be afraid of the VM approaches as long as you do SQL aware. So the thing we have to do is we have to talk to the business. And sometimes us technologists, DBAs I think are better at this than like C++ developers. No offense if there's any C++ developers out here. But we have to talk to the business, and we have to listen to the business. So it's kind of like being a consultant, right? There's this guy out there, as I've been growing as the company, I've been learning more how to be a leader because I've always been a technologist. And there's a bunch of books I've been devouring. And there's this guy out there named Henry Cloud, Dr. Henry Cloud. And he talks about what's your desired future state. And it's actually a really good consulting technique. What's your desired future state? Hey, dear business person, what do you want? We want to get HADR. We want the zeros, right? And where are we today? Well, we do a log backup every 4 hours, and then we shrink our log because we don't understand why we're doing a log backup. I've seen that before. So we're really far away. What's the gap? The gap is we have nothing for HADR. And how do we close it? Well, we have to start getting there. What do we do first, right? So the problem is sometimes we think of things in terms of this big, gigantic project, and we never do it. But what are like the 3 or 4 or 5 big things we have to do to get there? Document out the steps, show it to the business, say this is what we can do, and I'll show you a chart in a slide that I've used, something like it, not the exact chart, but document it, give the options to the business, help them pick what they want, so now they're deciding, and then do it. It's that easy. But we got to listen. We have to listen to the business, and that means we have to listen to the business, They're going to want some weird stuff sometimes. They're going to get mad when you give them the price tag, and they're going to always think it's easier than it really is. That happens all the time. That's like me with my mechanic. But you have to give the people what they want. See, I really was listening to the Kinks. So people like choices. But who here has ever eaten at Cheesecake Factory? I hate Cheesecake Factory. Like with a passion. They have decent microwave food and all that, but it's like I don't even know if I have anything big enough in here to show you. I mean, so this is I'm not using as much as I should. It's my full focus planner, and I'm not doing a good job with it. But like this right here makes a cheesecake menu. I mean, it's not even that small. Like it's bigger than this. So people like choices, but you can't give them too many choices. I go there and I pick something and I hate what I picked because I just say I can't make my stupid mind up. But unless I'm going to, like Brent Ozar and I will sometimes go out to nice dinners, and unless I'm going out with Brent, and Brent's picked the place because he likes food even better than I do. I do like it though. I don't like going to like a you don't have a menu kind of restaurant, you know? Like, so somewhere in the middle is good. 6 to 10 choices, 15 choices, that's perfect. I can make my mind up. There's gonna be something there I like. So don't give your business 4,000 choices. Your CEOs will hate you for it, and they'll never make their mind up. Give them 3 choices, or give them 2 or 4. But you want to give them choices, and you want to sort of guide them towards the choices that make sense for the business, because they don't really know what they want. You know what they want. You just have to explain to them what they can afford and how to do it. So in this one, I just sort of called it a super option, a standard option, and a no option. So you know, you could put, I would actually put in this chart, Kathy, I would probably add patching on this. I would say we should add a thing, this gives us patch protection, because I didn't put that here. So in the super approach, we're giving less than 5 RPO, and I put here a high availability RTO. And actually, I got them backwards, but a high availability RPO. So you have to have a different recovery point locally than DR. Sometimes you have to have the exact same one. If you have to have the same one, if you need to have 0 RPO and 0 RTO here for a local failure and there for a data center failure, that's doable, but it's going to be a lot of money. There's a lot of dollar signs there. You know, that's not Cheesecake Factory pricing. You know, that's the kind of restaurant when I ask if it's Brent's turn, I'll pick that restaurant. You know, if it's my turn, I'll pick number 3. We'll go to Wendy's, Brent. How's that? We'll go to Burger King and try that meatless thing. But the standard option here, in my example, is we still get really good RPO and RTO locally. So we're not giving up on quick failover and low data loss in the data center, but we're compromising. We're saying, well, listen, if our data center blows up, it's going to take us an hour to get back. But maybe we're going to have an hour. We could lose an hour of data, but we might take 4 hours to get back. Are you okay with that? Because if you're okay with that, we can do that with standard edition, and we can do that with just $2 signs. You know, now we're at the Cheesecake Factory, and it's not bad. It's good food once you pick. It's not bad food. It's okay. And then no is kind of like, it's good to have this is where we are. We can do nothing. This is if you want to spend no money and do nothing, we can stay where we are. Are you okay, dear CEO, telling all of our customers, or dear COO, the salesperson, are you okay telling all of our customers that we're okay losing a day of their data and making them down for a day? Do you want to sign off on my chart? Sure. So this helps them make that decision. And this is just a sample of things you could put on there. Again, I would really put operating system level protection because that matters. You know, again, if we patch and we're 24/7, if you have an 8-hour patch window, bless your heart, that's amazing, that's great. Some of our customers have that. We love those customers. They're easy. We just patch all night. It doesn't matter. We add indexes. We rebuild indexes. Although Brent says you can't rebuild indexes, I say you still can. But we do that kind of stuff, and it works. So that's kind of the rough idea of what you want to do. Would anybody add anything that I didn't mention here to the chart? Because it's okay. This can be your chart. I'm just giving an example on a slide presentation. I've made more complicated charts for customers. But you can go wider, but don't go deeper. Don't have too many choices. Yes, sir. Well, this is sort of my example of this is how bad you are today. You know, so yes, absolutely. You could actually have 24 hours or 4 hours. You could make that low cost option. So the question was, why wouldn't the option number 3 have, you know, why wouldn't I be fairer, like have differentials and logs? You could do that, and then you could only lose. Yep. 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 Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so he's saying, you know, that works for him, just the log backups, and they're accepting it. That works. That works. So here are some questions to ask, right? What about patching? I guess I did say patching. What about patching downtime? When you guys weren't looking, I typed that in. No, I didn't. Do we really need Enterprise Edition, especially now? We'll talk about that in a second. Do we need read-only workload offloading? Some people say we want to take our read workload and move it but you might not really need it. You might just think you need it. You might be able to do a read commit snapshot isolation level and do a few bits of, you might be able to spend 2 hours of index tuning and not have to worry about that and not spend the money. There's other questions, we'll get there and more. But wait, there's more. There's a change in the weather. That really is a Kink song. Go thank Microsoft. I said that a few times today. There are so many reasons to love SQL Server 2019. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been through SQL Server 6.5 through now. So I feel funny saying this, because I'm sure I've said this before, but SQL Server 2019 really feels like a revolutionary release. You know, I think 2012 I said that probably. I might have said that in SQL Server 2000. 2019 does so many things, and the licensing changes are big. Again, we can now do, on any version of SQL that's currently licensed, we can do a check DB on the secondary. If you are in an AG environment today, you better do check DBs in your secondary. I'll get questions at the end here, just because we're getting close on time. But you better do the check DBs in the secondary, because you don't know that your secondary is healthy to fail over to until you fail over to it. So if you were not doing check DBs there, wouldn't you hate to have been doing great check DBs every week with log backups saved all week on your primary? Your primary dies and you fail over, only to find out that 3 months ago there was a corruption event on your secondary you didn't know about, and now you failed over to a corrupt environment. So do your check DBs in your secondary. You can have more nodes, and what I mean by that is the whole thing we talked about already with the free failover. And this is the picture that Microsoft put out. And I really love this picture, because this explains what I was talking about. Under the old licensing rules, you see there's the red on the left there, 12 cores. With your 12 core license plus software assurance, you get to have your free HA. If you want to have DR, you're buying 12 more instance licenses in this case. 12 more cores of enterprise is not expensive, not inexpensive, it is expensive. With the new software assurance benefit, you buy 12 cores of software assurance, you don't have to buy 12 more. That right there just ate up a lot of the excuses that your management teams have for why they don't have HA and DR. Microsoft licensing is expensive. Brian, is that one of the more expensive things in your environment? Yeah. It's not your great consultants, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Microsoft licensing is expensive. So before we go, add it up. Take all these things together. We have to ask the right questions of the business. We have to talk to the business. We have to evaluate our licensing needs and our performance needs. And you see what I'm doing is I'm figuring out what do we need first. I'm not figuring out what do we want to do first. Plan your approach and then get on it and do it. And again, with the licensing changes and the technology available, there's just no excuse not to. So what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to come down and we'll walk around and answer questions. I want to ask these questions of you guys, and if you want to ask questions of me, you can. I'm just curious if anyone is on the cusp of implementing one of these technologies, or what's keeping you up right now in your environment. I'll show the end slide here for people who want to leave. We're about 8 minutes left. So go to straightpasssql.com, HADR. You'll see the slides here. Again, I'll update the slide deck, and I'll put the things I promised. I'll keep my notebook with me down there when I answer questions. And you can leave if you want. I'll stay on stage for 8 minutes with the microphone on, but then I'll just come down and answer questions while we let Jason go home and break everything down. So thank you very much. If you want to leave, leave. If you want to ask questions, ask questions. Well, thank you. Now I feel better. All right. I'll tell Jack you clap for me too. Yes, sir.
Go back a couple slides on
Yeah.
that graphic you showed of the licensing.
Yep.
And on all of those, you have on-prem. Is this new licensing model, what is on-prem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so the question for the folks listening in is on this deck here. It says on-prem, on-prem, on-prem. What do they mean by that? What they mean by that is where you installed SQL Server on a machine. So that can be on an Azure VM. It can be on an AWS VM. It can be in a data center. It can be in rack space. So that's what they mean. Yes, absolutely. Yep. They use on-prem. You've seen that a lot lately. They're using on-prem to kind of mean you've installed the box version of SQL Server. Yep. Non-PaaS. Yes, sir. Can you mix it up with Kubernetes? I honestly, I don't know. I don't have any chance to play with Kubernetes. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. I will not blog about that because I'm not an expert in that, but I will find the person who did, and I'll put that in the blog post. So thank you for the question about Kubernetes. So I'll just go around the room this way. Just are there any over here? Questions? I keep taking from this side. All right, we'll go over Kathy. Yes. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question for the people on the audio recording is, what about replication, basically? And one of my nodes I want to add HA or DR to is a replication subscriber. Well, there's a couple of blog posts from Microsoft out there. I'll include those, but you are allowed to, you can have any part of an AG now, any part of replication, starting, and I want to say it was SQL 2014. You can have a distributor, or you can have a or you can have a subscriber. Any of those parts are allowed to actually be on an AG. So it's supported, and the failovers are handled nicely. So your replication, it's kind of like restarting replication. It's okay. You're not replicating to the database anymore or to the instance name. You're replicating to the AG listener name. Yep. So it's okay if it fails over, because when it comes back up, it's still called subscriber listener. Yep. So you'll be okay. Yep. Oh, you should be okay. If your replication set up right and all these other caveats are good, you'll be okay. Yeah, amen. Yeah, you got to test. Testing is important. Thank you so much. Is there a question over this way? Oh, sure. One slide back. Back this way.
Yeah, so I was asking if
Thank you.
it was standard alone when you talk about CheckDB, like doing CheckDB on the secondary replica. Is that standard or enterprise?
Yes, it's either. So the question is, can you do the CheckDB on the secondary? Is it standard or enterprise? It's both. Yep. No, so if you're on a supported version of SQL Server, and you have software assurance, actually for the CheckDB, if you're on a supported version of SQL, you're allowed to do it, period. Yep. Yep, this too. As I understand it, it should be. Yeah, check with your Microsoft licensing folks, but it shouldn't matter the technology as long as you have one node that's an HA, one node that's a DR, one node that's a primary, one node that's HA, one node that's DR, and you are on a current version of SQL, so you can't do this in SQL Server 2008, and you are paying for software assurance, and you're up to date with your software assurance, you're good to go. Yeah, that's my understanding of the license change, which is really, really big. That's, to me, is one of the biggest announcements. And, oh, by the way, in SQL Server 2019, you can do transparent database encryption now in Standard Edition. So that was one of the other reasons I had a lot of clients that just went to Enterprise Edition just to get TDE. So I'm working on an email to my customers that's going to say, yee, we can do this stuff with less licensing costs. And that's a big deal for my customers because they're spending a lot of money on licensing. I'd rather them spend money on me instead of licensing. I'm just kidding, guys. But any other questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have failover clusters. You're using mirroring for DR. You want to get away from that and do something simpler with AGs. Sure. Availability groups. Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of clients. Well, so the question is it a good idea to do it in physical? It's fine to do it in physicals. Yeah, so I like physicals because physicals, let me say it this way. There's no problem with virtualization. Virtualization is great. There are bad VMware administrators out there sometimes. I know there's bad DBAs out there. None here at PASS, but there are bad VMware administrators out there too. So I have no problem with the physical. A physical is great because a physical, I mean, if for an availability group, I would potentially, depending on what you have for storage in your environment, I might just go nuts and say, well, if you want to spend all this money anyway, let's spend a little bit more money. And if we're doing a multi-node AG, we're talking about enterprise anyway, so they're already in enterprise budget land because you have to be enterprise. So let's put as much memory as we can afford on there because why not? That's inexpensive compared to licensing. And let's get a bunch of really fast local storage and let's spec out our machine that we can have good local disks and then we have fast local storage. We don't have to fight with a SAN admin and we don't have to fight with a VM administrator. So it's okay. Yeah, so you're going to be enterprise, but with 3 nodes, you have HA, you have Right? So you have primary, and this is, right here, this is one data stream, this is the other. It's easier to try and split my fingers. You have production, you have your HA replica, and then you have your DR. You're paying a license for this one, and that's it. Yep, you have to buy software assurance, so you're paying a third of the license cost, but you're buying this license, and you get these two along with it. You can fail over to it and run for, I think, 30 days in a failover event, and yet we have to come back. So you can't run a secondary database. You can't put your monitoring database. You can't put SQL Sentry's database over here, for instance. No. Yep. Once you do anything, you can for patching, but yeah. So you can do that. What you can't do is you can't run two things at once on two different nodes. Yep. So as long as it's all here or all here. Yep. So what I'm gonna do is you can start recording. I might keep the microphone going as I answer questions, but we're officially done. So thank you guys. But I'll answer questions.